Hi, everybody. Let me embarrass this next speaker for a little bit. Not just because she's dressed down like a true engineer and she's making me look bad with the tie on, but because she has a very impressive career path and then current role. As is obvious to everybody, one of the key themes for today is to talk about developing the infrastructure necessary to support whatever monetization path that you take, basically to accelerate whatever approach you want to take. There's no better example, literally in the history of software, for accelerating the monetization journey than OpenAI. They launched ChatGPT less than 3 years ago, going from 0 to 12 billion in revenue at this point. And in order to underpin that, obviously, we've been lucky to partner with them throughout this entire period, but they've also developed their own journey and their own infrastructure internally, and that's why we're excited to talk with Sara today. Sara herself, she comes originally from Box, where she was a back-end data engineer. She then led and built the monetization engineering team at Asana, which was 50 engineers plus by the time that she left, and then came to OpenAI a little bit under 2 years ago to build the financial engineering team and take them to the next stage of their own growth. And then, by the way, the last time that I saw her, she was an intern at Lazy Bear, which was a little bit strange. My husband and I were having dinner there. She was just peeling carrots for us, and we had a good conversation. So maybe at some point you can talk with her about her future career ambitions, a lot of good things ahead for her. But anyway, with that, thank you, and let me welcome Sara Conlon from OpenAI. Sara, thank you.
Nice
Welcome.
to meet you.
Okay, so Sara, so you run the financial engineering team at OpenAI. By the way, one thing I know everybody wants me to ask when AGI is coming. I can't ask that question today. This is all about engineering and back-end operations. But yeah, okay, so you own the financial engineering team at OpenAI. So maybe start with that. What does that mean? What is the purpose of your team, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so I started this team about a year and a half ago when I joined OpenAI. To be honest, when I joined, the role itself wasn't as clear as what I thought. So I think at this point it has changed. But when I joined, essentially, OpenAI didn't wait for me to make money, obviously. But the way that financial engineering was happening is that each product team was kind of thinking a little bit in isolation of how can we monetize? And then from an engineering standpoint, they were doing their own integration in order to have transactions able to happen on the stack. And so the idea of creating the financial engineering team was to kind of gather all of these different operations that were spread out throughout the company into one unit so that the finance team, for example, would have only one point of contact, and also different product teams could be talking to only one team when they were thinking about monetization motions. And we kind of transformed this into the one thing that no engineer on a product team want to kind of deal with into, hey, we have this big box of Lego for you, and you can have your building blocks when you're thinking about monetization. So that's, I would say in short, what we do, kind of building these Legos for everybody.
I want you to go a little bit deeper on that, because the very first day that we met, I was sort of onboarding you to our relationship. I asked you what your top priority was, and you said something that now I understand very deeply, but at the time I did not. Your answer was that your top priority was to understand the company's entity model and then to engineer around that. So maybe you can go into that in greater detail. What did that mean?
Yes, I think when I think about kind of monetization motions with my engineering lenses, I think about entities and then who are we selling to? And especially for OpenAI, this can be an individual, like any of you, if you have a ChatGPT Plus or Pro subscription. This can be a very large company. This can be a subset of a company. And the way that in our data model, we kind of get to represent who we sell to, end up having like a tremendous influence on how we do different integration and how this integrates as well with other parts of the product, especially when we're thinking about kind of billing versus access. There are certain things that are regulated by your billing. For example, if you have obviously credit-based pricing, you definitely want to kind of limit how much somebody can spend. That's kind of like the access portion. But you also want to kind of send them a bill either upfront or at the end of the month. And understanding these entities, I think if you don't get it right from the beginning, gets you in a lot of trouble. Because, for example, if you're thinking about access at the individual level for a company, but then if your billing is completely at the kind of org level, then good luck implementing spend control, for example.
So go a little bit further into that. What are some of the Legos that you've built over time that have been really effective for you all?
Let me think about it for a second. I think things that have been very important, since we're just talking about kind of spend controls, have been to really understand what type of, I guess we're going to continue with the Legos. I hope can we use Legos?
Oh, please, yeah, Legos.
Should we say just building blocks or something else? Yeah, I think when I think about access, I think there's like very different type of access, and this might be relevant to some of you, but I think we have very different type of customers. Some of them, are very large companies. We know they're going to pay us at the end of the month. Others were like, oh, use these developers that we've never seen, and you started using our API. Let's make sure that you have some credits. And so I think the building blocks of access have been really around the kind of how can we manage, for example, like fraud? How can we make sure we have building blocks that enable us to control how much people can spend, which are like very different in implementation from the building blocks you want to have, where it's more somebody wants to control how much they're spending. If they're spinning up an internal project with some engineer or somebody else within the company wants to build a bot to automate an internal workflow, you don't want this to start increasing the bill by millions of dollars, and you probably want to make sure you give them some opportunity to kind of limit their cost on a kind of per project level. And so I think making the distinction, for example, between these two types of building blocks has been very important because they serve like very different purposes. And so I think trying to identify each time we like perform a specific action, who is it intended to and what is kind of the end goal? Is it like a service we're providing to the customer? Are we protecting ourselves? Has been kind of really important to really have like a modular system.
So now let's talk about the modular system. So one of the concepts that we've been talking about is having a pricing dictator, basically one person overhead that's setting the stage. As a spoiler, that's not how it works at OpenAI, but maybe you can talk with me about how that does work at OpenAI.
I wish I knew, but it's interesting. I think, obviously, in the year and a half that I've been there, the company has grown quite a lot. I think overall, it's a very collaborative company. I think we don't care too much about the hierarchy. I think whoever has expertise in a certain domain will kind of, communicate their ideas. I think from my perspective, I've been trying, and honestly, this conference is very inspiring in that direction. But I've really been trying. At some point, I realized essentially there are several people who think about pricing in different ways. People on the data side, people on the go-to-market side, obviously individual product team think about monetization sometimes, usually too late. And I think, I've been kind of thinking about this kind of 3 phases model for my team, where initially I think there was a kind of survival phase, which my worst nightmare was we should never delay a launch because monetization isn't ready for it. Unfortunately, that has happened in the past. Otherwise, I wouldn't be worried about it. And so that was kind of the survival mode. I think the second layer was more of an advising mode, where we had kind of teams coming to us and thinking about, hey, we would want to do maybe credit-based pricing for this. Like, how are you thinking about this? Has it worked for other products? And then we can absolutely tell them, like, yes, let's do it. Let's use this unit so that we stay consistent. And then I think I'm really hoping to take my team to kind of the next level, where we kind of proactively think, like, we look at different motions and we can start informing different product teams on how it works. That being said, I didn't answer your question because I don't have the answer. So, I don't think I am this person at OpenAI, to be clear, but I think, a lot of us within OpenAI have a role to play, and I believe in just like trying to make a difference where we can make a difference.
Well, maybe this is kind of a look ahead question, but I think we are proposing that it's important to centralize the strategy to break down walls within the company. But a different approach might be that you decentralize by having a central team like you that basically supports that operation, right? So different individual PMs can experiment within their own product area. Does that feel like the ambition of the OpenAI, or like talk with me about how decentralization makes sense in your organization?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's kind of like if you have a core job that you are doing and you're realizing that you can go further in that core job, obviously if this core job is somewhat related to monetization, it kind of takes that next step going forward. I mean, I would love to have like a chief value officer. I think I would be a little bit worried, at least within the kind of OpenAI concept, that if we just kind of parachuted a person and they were trying to get a lot of people aligned, that might create a little bit more friction over time. I think if you're starting with that model from scratch, and you have kind of reporting lines that also reflect this model, I think that might work. But from my perspective, I'm actually thinking that having potentially our team being at least a centralized place where information is, and making sure we have kind of a direct line to the leadership to communicate changes seems like a model that has worked maybe for a month or something.
Okay, the brass tacks. What does your team look like, and what did it start with when you started about 2 years ago?
So the second part is easier. So it looked like this. That was just me. I still remember, I think, to this day, when I joined on March 25th, and as I imagine there's a bunch of people from finance here, what happens on the March 25th is that 5 days after there is month-end close for March, and I remember the first thing that was asked from me was like, can you run the month-end close script? And I was like, sure, I've never seen it. I have no idea, but I'll do my best. Luckily, there was an engineer who joined on April 2nd, a little bit too late. I think right now, I've kind of divided the team in 4 different pods. We have one pod who is actually, called pricing and packaging. I'm not really good with naming, so I change the team names every other day just to keep it interesting. But essentially, it's kind of a core team whose first customers are the different product verticals of OpenAI. So they're both thinking about kind of consistency in the kind of UI block components. So think about, we talked about usage billing dashboard, offering visibility to customers, having paths that, regardless if they self-serve or sales-assisted, having kind of common blocks across all line of products. At least that's aspirational. I'm not saying we have reached that goal today. And they are also thinking about kind of from a back-end perspective, what building blocks can they use? We have kind of a sister team of that team who is our infrastructure team and is more closely working with different partners that we have like Metronome and also with our internal infrastructure. Essentially, the idea is like, okay, it's cool to have these building blocks, but somebody needs to actually power these building blocks. So they're mainly working with our kind of vendors and also with our internal infrastructure team. And then we have 2 other teams that are kind of tangential to this. We have our teams that we call financial automation. As we kind of talked about a lot here, a lot of people care about monetization with different lenses at a company. And so this team is particularly focused on ensuring that the operational aspect of monetization work, like think about kind of code to cash, provisioning your contracts, how does that end up in the same systems with the same source of truth as what you might have for the rest of your customers. They also, obviously work a lot with finance. Depending how month-end close goes, it's an ongoing relationship. And they will work on just anything that can be kind of automated. They work on essentially integration and automation of all these processes. Really important, I think, to be intentional there. And then we have a payments team, which is a little bit more tangential and are thinking obviously about internationalization of our payment methods.
Okay, and so all of that, you might think that this would report to, who knows, the VP of engineering. Maybe it's an IT function, like some of the things that you're describing. But when you started, you were reporting into the head of integrity at OpenAI. And so talk with me about why that was the place where financial engineering began at OpenAI.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, actually. I don't know. It's actually really interesting because I think throughout my tenure at OpenAI, I've had 5 different managers. I'm actually back in integrity somehow.
Yeah,
but it's. I think at the time it's because we were probably facing a lot of kind of fraud issues, and so it probably made sense. Like that was kind of the most burning problem for us at the time, especially on the API business side. And so I believe integrity is kind of organization who really thinks about fraud and also like kind of identity. And so that was a good home. But realistically, we operate pretty independently from, I would say wherever we sit, we still do the same thing, so it doesn't matter too much.
So fraud was one challenge that you had to deal with at OpenAI. Maybe talk a little bit further about another challenge. What was one unexpected challenge that you had coming into the business and that you've addressed over the last 2 years?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the other kind of more like structural challenge that we faced is, you always end up shipping your org chart. And so because monetization was kind of owned individually by product teams with different lenses of, there was a lot of investments or little investments into it. What we ended up is that all of the monetization code was so deeply embedded, like all the way to the top level of the product. And to give you some like anecdotes that I wish I wouldn't have to tell because it's, that caused a pretty big sev. Like earlier this year, we launched a new image generation model. And as part of this launch, we had, a great, tremendous interest in this product, a lot of new signups. And we randomly discovered that we were actually creating a billing account for every single free user that was created. Well, that took down a lot of things on the engineering side. And I think that was a reflection of essentially, if you don't pay attention to your integration point with the monetization stack, it gets everywhere, and it shouldn't be everywhere. For multiple reasons, I'm happy to develop more on this. And so I think just having to essentially kind of platformize a little more, both to avoid this kind of incidents, but also to be much more modular. For example, as Andrew talked about before, when we launched credit-based pricing for ChatGPT, we weren't able to reuse what we had for API because it's just what had been done for API was really completely done within our API stack. And I think that's something that now, we've kind of changed the ways that we are implementing things so that precisely if there is like a new product vertical that comes in, we can support them with any of the existing monetization motions that we have.
Okay, so I want to talk about Asana in a second, but last thing on OpenAI and what you've experienced for the last 2 years. So, I think from an outcome perspective, you all have shipped and launched hundreds of products in the past 2 years. You've made pricing changes constantly, and you've supported a bunch of different go-to-market motions. Just to repeat it back, like what do you think is the fundamental reason why you've been able to go at that speed?
Yeah, I think, you're just sitting next to me, so it's
okay.
I think that's, I don't mean, like, obviously it's, I think it's a team effort. It really takes a whole company to kind of be able to move at that speed, and it takes a lot of great partners as well. I think and it hasn't been smooth all the way through. We've gone through some code reds a few times. But I think we've put a lot of intention. Every single pricing change that we've done, every month and close, we always look at like what could have done better. What can we automate next time? And I think, over time we've kind of learned a lot. So it's not like, somebody sat down one day and was like, let me just write down how we're always going to do this, because there's, guess what? There's always something new that comes up and that we hadn't anticipated. And so I think just that constant retrospective mindset and just pushing towards automation has been what's been the most helpful.
Okay, so on Asana, so you now have like a pretty long career in what you might call billing engineering or monetization engineering. This is a relatively new field. Like Scott, he started at Dropbox when they had nobody on growth, right? And so it was essentially this whole concept was built really in the past 10 years, and you were there from the very beginning, just like he was. So what has changed in the last, let's say, for 5 years, 6 years? Basically, what feels different now versus what you knew and what you did at Asana?
Yes, I think it's interesting because I don't remember who was talking about this earlier, but when I was at Asana, I think we probably went through maybe 2 pricing changes or something like this. Like I don't even really remember because I feel like there's been so many since then at OpenAI. And I think I had this idea of all of the challenges were more kind of grappling with the subscription models and trying to understand how can you drive adoption, especially within big companies with sometimes like hybrid subscriptions where people can be on different tiers. And trust me, from an engineering perspective, this gets very, very complicated. And I think I spent honestly most of my 5 years trying to solve some issues that weren't even really related to like velocity on pricing, but more just surviving within that model and making it kind of work to enable like a fast adoption of Asana. Whereas I think now, essentially with engineering lenses, when you move towards usage billing, you end up with so much more flexibility because there are certain things that you just don't worry about anymore. Like if you think about subscriptions and licenses, you are completely tying two concepts, which are access and billing. And so if you have, for example, people who are on different tiers, but within the same company, you have to think for every single feature, what does it mean? I'm interacting with this free user and this other user is not free, but if this other user who is not free, how do I, like, you know, they would want to invite the free user, but then they get something, you know, can they game it? With usage billing, I felt like you completely transform this and you're able to just have your features and you just pay for what you consume. And regardless if you go just usage or outcome, I think you get that. And so I think for me, this big shift really enables like a ton of velocity that I think before was just prevented by just really some engineering constraint on the kind of subscription model.
So now maybe thinking ahead then, and without basically revealing any NPI about OpenAI's pricing strategy to come, conceptually, and if to give advice to people in this room, what are you looking to prepare for the next 5 years? Thinking ahead, where will monetization engineering and basically supporting the infrastructure of monetization go?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I thought about some things this morning that I wrote down on my notebook, and I think actually one thing that really resonated is that for better or for worse, all models don't go away. And so I think as you're thinking about iteration speed and changing your pricing model, you have to think about, well, you might have a lot of contracts that are already signed with customers and that are going to last for years. And obviously, if you tell everybody like, hey, we're lowering the price, like, yeah, that's not a problem, and people will be glad to amend the contract. But if you're like, hey, you had a seat-based model, and all of a sudden we're moving everything to usage billing, like, that doesn't fly. And I remember there was a very specific model when I joined OpenAI. Like, the first thing I heard is like, yeah, we're going to deprecate this one. Don't spend too much time on it. Obviously, it's still, it's absolutely still something we have to support. And so, rather than thinking in kind of migration steps, really think about how am I going to build a system that is expandable without falling into the pitfall of I'm just going to patch something on top of everything. So think really as a first principle, or like tell your engineering team to really think about how we're going to expand, and never tell me that we're just migrating off. Like, I mean, as an engineer, you're always working towards 10 migrations at once, and that's kind of just a way of life. But as a company, at least if you have the right system to be expendable, then you can move much faster.
Okay, last question. So as I said, the last time I saw you was at Lazy Bear, where you were an intern to the chef there. So how the hell do you have time to do that, and why? Like a few years ago, I had kids, and I decided I needed to learn how to cook so that they could eat other things and take out food. And I tend to push things a bit far when I want to learn something, so I figured the best way to learn how to cook was to do an internship in a Michelin star kitchen. But no, for real, I did start an online class to learn how to cook. I've been learning a lot. I've been having fun. I love having dinners at my place as well, and I love good food. And as part of that class, you're supposed to do an internship to graduate, and so I did ask ChatGPT to draft me an email on, how do I find an internship in the city? It offered several restaurants, but it didn't resonate. And Lazy Bear is a place where we had our rehearsal dinner. It's a very special place for me. And I sent them an email, and 24 hours later, they said yes. And so then I did 4 Saturdays there, actually 1 Thursday, just to be to make sure I was cooking for Andrew when he stopped by. And it's a tough industry. It's if you want to do 12 hours a day with a 15 minutes break in the middle to have lunch, but the lunch is worth it. The lunch is even better than what you'll get at dinner there. And in terms of time, I mean, I try to just time box things. There is so much you can do as an individual, and
when I'm at work, I spend all of my time just thinking about work, and when I'm at home, I spend all of my time not thinking about work. And when I'm at the restaurant, I spend all of my time worrying about if this tomato got peeled perfectly. And it's refreshing. If you don't have a passion outside of work, I strongly encourage you to find one.
Well, I hope that this gives a window into the craft that Sara brings to monetization. Again, everybody, thank you, and let's welcome and thank Sara.